Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Beyond Blood Sugar podcast, where we ditch the outdated advice and finally talk about what's actually driving insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been told that your diabetes is just about sugar? Like, as long as your blood sugar is in range, you're doing great. Or maybe you've been handed a medication and sent on your way without any real explanation as to why your blood sugar was high in the first place. If that's you, you are not alone. That's kind of the standard story. Here's the truth, though. That whole quote, blood sugar is the problem narrative is only part of the picture. And if we only focus on lowering blood sugar, we are massively missing the point. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. It's kind of what this whole podcast is about. This is a real special episode, though, so you're going to want to stick with me to the end. So, back in 2008, a researcher and physician named Dr. Ralph DeFronzo gave what's known as the Banting Lecture, kind of the biggest deal in the diabetes research world. And in that talk, he introduced the concept of something called the Ominous Octet, and it was a game changer. What he showed is that type 2 diabetes isn't just a one organ problem. It's not just about your pancreas or blood sugar levels. It's a multi-system dysfunction across your liver, your muscles, your fat cells, your gut, your kidney, even your brain. 8 different things, 8 different mechanisms in the body that break down over time, and together they drive the progression of type 2 diabetes. And if we're not addressing all of them, we're actually not fixing the problem. So, in today's episode, I'm walking you through what those 8 core defects are, what's really happening in your body before and after a diagnosis, and how all of it ties back to insulin. Because, as always, that's the real star of this show. And don't worry, I'm breaking it down in a way that makes it simple and actionable without needing a medical degree to follow along. Okay. So, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into what your doctor should have told you about what's actually driving your blood sugar issues. So, let's start with the basics. Why the blood sugar only approach doesn't work, because this is where most people get stuck. For decades, type 2 diabetes has been treated as a blood sugar issue. That's what doctors test. That's what medications target. That's what most people track. Okay. And so naturally, we're led to believe if I can just get my blood sugars in range, I'm all good. But here's the thing, blood sugar is just a symptom, it's the effect, not the root cause. It's kind of like, I think I've given this analogy before. If your house was flooding and someone handed you a mop instead of fixing the leak, that's what blood sugar medication is in a lot of cases. It might be the mop to mop up some excess sugar, but that's not addressing why your body is struggling in the first place. It's not addressing the leak. So, what I want you to know, and what Dr. DeFronzo made crystal clear in his research, is that type 2 diabetes is not just a pancreas problem. It's not just about your body not making enough insulin, for example. And it's definitely not just about eating too much sugar or not moving enough. It's about the entire metabolic system being out of sync. And there are 8 key systems in your body that all contribute to this dysfunction. Think about that, 8 different systems, all playing a role in pushing your body toward insulin resistance and eventually full-blown diabetes. And yet, the way we treat this condition, we usually focus on one thing, lower the blood sugar, and that's it. But if your liver is overproducing glucose, if your muscles are insulin resistant, if your gut hormones aren't functioning properly, if your kidneys are recycling sugar back into the bloodstream, then fixing one thing does not fix the whole picture, right? That's why people get worse over time, even when they follow the rules. That's why A1C might look better on paper, but energy stays low, weight might be creeping up, medication lists are getting longer. So if you've ever thought, I'm doing everything I was told, why am I not getting better? That's probably why. Because the system we're in still hyper focuses on sugar, not insulin, and still obsessed with symptom management and not root cause resolution. Okay, once you understand these 8 drivers, these 8 broken pieces in the metabolic machine, you'll never look at your diagnosis or treatment plan the same again. So let's start walking through this thing, okay? Again, there are 8 defects that make up what Dr. DeFronzo called the ominous octet, and each one plays a role in pushing your body towards insulin resistance. And this isn't just like nerdy science, this is your real life body. And understanding what's happening inside of it is empowering. Okay. So, number one, let's start with what most people associate with diabetes, the pancreas, more specifically, the beta cells. These are the little powerhouses inside your pancreas that produce insulin. Now, insulin's job is pretty straightforward. After you eat, your blood sugar raises, insulin gets released to help shuttle that glucose into your cells where it can be used for energy. It's how your body keeps blood sugar from climbing too high. We all know this part. In type 2 diabetes, though, there's a breakdown in this system. And contrary to what some people think, the pancreas just doesn't just stop making insulin one day in type 2 diabetes. The beta cells don't wake up and say, you know what, peace out, I'm out. What actually happens is like a more slow burnout. Years before a diagnosis, your body starts to become insulin resistant to that insulin, right? It's like your cells are plugging their ears and ignoring insulin signal. So in response, your pancreas ramps up production. It sends out more insulin to get the same effect. And this is the beginning of oh my gosh, say this word 12 times fast. Hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia. It's a really hard word to say for me. Chronically high insulin levels. Let's go with that. Okay. And your pancreas keeps doing that day in and day out, responding to constant glucose spikes from refined carbs, sugary snacks, eating all day long, even stress. It's working overtime. Okay. And then over time, this chronic demand starts to wear out the beta cells. They become dysfunctional. Some of them die off entirely. And once enough damage is done, insulin secretion starts to drop. At this stage, blood sugar finally starts to rise, sometimes before this stage, but definitely at this stage. And that's often the point when someone is officially diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. But here's the thing, the pancreatic dysfunction isn't the beginning, it's the end result of years of insulin resistance and metabolic stress. There's a critical window before this stage when intervention can make a massive difference, when insulin levels are high, but blood sugar is normal. This is the part that gets missed in traditional care. And this is actually exactly the area of my dissertation for my PhD focus that we'll focus on. Doctors often wait until blood sugar rises significantly before taking action. But by then, the pancreas has already been struggling for a very long time. So when people hear your pancreas isn't producing enough insulin, the real story is that it used to. It was just pushed too hard for too long. And once beta cells are lost, they don't regenerate easily. That's why the goal is to reduce the demand on the pancreas early by lowering insulin, stabilizing blood sugars, and giving those cells a break before they burn out. Okay. So this is one piece of the ominous octet, but it's the one that tends to show up last after a lot of damage has already been done. So the focus shouldn't be on replacing insulin or managing blood sugars after the fact. It should be on protecting the beta cells from the beginning. Okay. All right. Let's move on to another player in the blood sugar regulation, the liver. This is number 2. Now, most people don't realize how big a role the liver plays in glucose control. It's not just about what you eat. Your liver is like your built-in backup generator. When you're not eating like overnight or between meals or fasting, your liver steps in and produces glucose. This process is called gluconeogenesis. You've probably heard this before, which literally means making new glucose. It does this to keep your blood sugar stable when you're fasting. Totally normal, totally necessary. But here's the problem. In insulin resistance, the liver gets confused. It stops listening to insulin, the hormone that's supposed to say, hey, we got enough sugar in the blood. You can chill out. And when the liver ignores that signal, it keeps dumping glucose into the bloodstream, even when it's not needed. So imagine this, you eat a meal, your blood sugar is already rising from the food, and now your liver is also pumping out extra glucose as if you hadn't eaten at all. It's like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. This is a major reason why blood sugars can stay elevated even if your meals are, quote, clean. It's not just about carbs or portion size. It's about this miscommunication between insulin and your liver. Now let's talk about mornings. because this is where it gets frustrating for a lot of people. You wake up, you haven't even eaten anything yet, you check your blood sugar and it's high. And you're thinking, what the heck? I didn't even have a snack last night. What's going on here is called the dawn phenomenon. It's when your liver releases glucose in the early morning hours, triggered by natural circadian hormone shifts like cortisol, totally normal. But in insulin resistance, the liver kind of overreacts. It dumps too much glucose and insulin can't shut it down. So your fasting blood sugar rises, not because of food, but because your liver is producing glucose, even when there's already enough in circulation. Okay. And again, this isn't a willpower issue or a diet failure. This is a metabolic miscommunication happening deep inside the body. So to manage this, it's not about eating less, it's about restoring insulin sensitivity, especially in the liver. That's why lifestyle strategies that lower insulin, like reducing refined carbs, managing stress, improving sleep, time restricted eating, can be so powerful. You're not just helping your blood sugar, you're retraining your liver to behave, basically. All right, so let's talk about your muscles. This is number three. And I'm not talking about muscles for strength or movement, but as one of the most powerful tools your body has to manage blood sugar. After you eat, especially a meal that includes carbohydrates, your blood sugars naturally rise. Your body responds by producing insulin, releasing insulin, which acts like a key, unlocks the door of your cells, especially in the muscle tissue. You've all heard this, right? Glucose can or remove itself from the bloodstream, enter into the muscles, and this is where it's used for energy or stored for later, okay? But here's where things go sideways. When your muscles become insulin resistant, they stop responding to that key. The doors don't open, so the glucose stays in the bloodstream, floating around with nowhere to go. And when you see elevated blood sugars after meals, not necessarily because you ate too much, but because your body can't properly use what you did eat, this is what's happening behind the scenes, or one of the things that can be happening, I should say. And this is huge because your muscles are the largest site for glucose disposal. They're designed to absorb a big chunk of what you eat. So when they stop cooperating, that's a massive bottleneck in your metabolism. And here's something that most people don't realize. This dysfunction in the muscle is often one of the first signs of insulin resistance, and it can start years before your blood sugar becomes abnormal on a lab test. You might not feel it as high glucose yet, but you will feel it in other ways. The post-meal crash, the afternoon fatigue, the sluggishness after a bowl of pasta or a sandwich. That's your body struggling to move glucose where it needs to go. And over time, if that resistance continues, it starts a vicious cycle. More insulin is released to try to force glucose into the muscles, which leads to higher baseline insulin, which worsens insulin resistance, and round it goes. This is one of the key reasons why movement, even simple movement, is so powerful. When you use your muscles, even if they're insulin resistant, you can bypass some of that resistance and help shuttle the glucose in. You don't have to run marathons and walk after dinner, lifting something heavy a couple times a week, standing up more often during the day. These things matter because the more you move your muscles, the more glucose they can pull in with or without insulin. Remember, I said it bypasses that insulin resistance? So if your muscles have stopped responding to insulin, it's not a lost cause. It's a call to action to move your body, move your muscles. Okay, so let's talk about fat. Number four, and not the kind of fat on your plate, but the kind that's stored in your body, specifically your fat cells, which is also known as your adipose tissue. And here's what a lot of people don't realize. Fat cells are not just storage lockers. They're not these quiet little bubbles that just sit around holding on to excess calories. Fat cells are actually metabolically active. They release hormones, communicate with other tissues, and play a huge role in your overall metabolic health. Did you know that? A lot of people don't. Now, under normal conditions, when your body needs extra fuel, like between meals or during exercise, it breaks down stored fat into free fatty acids and releases them into the bloodstream. This process is called lipolysis. Again, totally normal, totally healthy in moderation. Okay. But in people with type 2 diabetes or advanced insulin resistance, lipolysis gets dysregulated. Basically, your fat cells stop behaving. They start breaking down too much fat and releasing too many free fatty acids into the bloodstream, even when the body doesn't actually need that energy. So, what happens? You end up with this flood of fuel in the bloodstream, more than what your body can use. And now it's chaos, okay? These excess fatty acids start interfering with insulin signaling in other tissues, especially in the muscle and the liver. So, the places where glucose is supposed to go, and hold on a second, my phone is going crazy here. Let me turn this off. Okay. So, what was I saying? Chaos. Okay. So the places where the glucose is supposed to go, now they're jammed up with fat. It's like trying to deliver sugar to a warehouse that's already overflowing with fuel. And this just worsens insulin resistance, which then raises insulin levels and the cycle continues. More insulin means more fat storage. But at the same time, your fat cells are still dumping out fatty acids into the blood. It's totally backwards, right? You can think of it like an engine that's been flooded with gas. There's too much fuel, the system gets overwhelmed, and now nothing works properly. So when people think insulin resistance is just about carbs or sugar, this is the piece they're missing. Fat metabolism plays a massive role, not because you're eating fat, but because your fat cells are behaving inappropriately due to this hormonal dysfunction. This is actually one reason why visceral fat, the fat like around your organs, is especially dangerous. This fat is highly active. And when it goes rogue, it contributes to inflammation, hormonal imbalances, and worsens the glucose control across the board. So, again, it's not just about body fat as a number on a scale, it's about your fat cells and what they're doing. And when they go rogue, it sets the stage for just absolute metabolic chaos. All right, now we're getting into one of the lesser known but super important players of the whole blood sugar game, and this is your gut. This is number 5. We aren't talking about the digestion part exactly, but the hormones your gut releases when you eat. One of the most important ones is GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide 1. I'm sure you've heard of GLP-1, kind of all over the place right now. But do you know what it is and what it does in the body? Here's how it works in a healthy body. You eat a meal, your gut senses food is incoming and releases GLP-1, which sends a message to your pancreas, hey, food's here, time to get insulin ready. That early heads up gives your body a chance to release insulin faster and more efficiently, helping to manage that rise in blood sugar. Now, that's not all GLP-1 does. It also tells your liver to slow down glucose production, and it helps signal fullness to the brain so you don't overeat. It's like a behind the scenes director, right? Coordinating all the major players, your pancreas, liver, brain, all to respond to food appropriately. Now, here's the problem in type 2 diabetes that gut signal gets quiet. For whatever reason, whether it's chronic high blood sugar, inflammation, long term metabolic dysfunction, the gut stops releasing enough or the body stops responding properly. And when that happens, everything falls out of sync. Your pancreas doesn't get the message to release insulin properly, so glucose from your meal kind of hangs out in your bloodstream longer than it should. Your liver doesn't get the memo to slow down, so it keeps pumping out excess glucose even though you've just eaten. Your brain doesn't get that strong fullness signal, so you may keep eating past what your body actually needs. It's subtle but powerful. This is one of the reasons why type 2 diabetes can see um, people see this like blood sugar spike even after relatively small meals. It's not always about the carbs or the size of the meal, it's that the hormonal response to that food is blunted or delayed. So even if you're eating right, your body's internal communication system is off. Okay. This is also where some diabetes medications like GLP-1 receptor agonists come in. They're designed to mimic this effect. But for those of us focused on lifestyle and functional nutrition, there's a deeper question to ask. What if we could support and restore this gut signal naturally? What if diet, gut health, and eating patterns could help reawaken this system? Because it can. Because when your gut starts talking again, your whole metabolic orchestra plays better. Okay, let's shift the spotlight back to the pancreas. But this time, we're not going to talk about insulin. Okay, this is number 6. Your pancreas, also produces glucagon, okay, your alpha cells, which does the exact opposite of insulin, more or less. While insulin's job is to lower blood sugar by helping move glucose into cells, glucagon's job is to raise blood sugar, usually between meals or during fasting when your body needs a little boost of glucose for energy. In a healthy system, insulin and glucagon work like a tag team, okay? When one is up, the other is down. It's a beautiful, coordinated system. But in type 2 diabetes, that rhythm breaks. What we see is an inappropriate increase in glucagon levels, even when blood sugar is already high, which, let's be honest, makes zero sense, right? It's like your body is already flooded with sugar and your pancreas decides to yell, "Hey, liver, we need some more." So the liver listens to glucagon, starts converting stored energy into glucose, and dumps it into the bloodstream, making already high blood sugar even higher. Now your body is stuck in this internal kind of tug of war. Insulin's trying to bring sugar down while glucagon is trying to bring it up at the same time. And the result, a blood sugar roller coaster that's hard to manage, no matter how clean you're eating or how carefully you count your carbs. This imbalance in glucagon is generally overlooked in mainstream conversations, at least about diabetes. But it's crucial because unless we address both sides of the equation, insulin and glucagon, we're missing a big part of the story. What's even more interesting is that some of the gut hormones we talked about earlier, like GLP-1, are supposed to suppress glucagon after eating. But when this system is impaired, like in type 2 diabetes, that suppression doesn't happen. So again, your body is stuck in this loop that it just can't escape. The bottom line, glucagon isn't the villain, it's just dysregulated, right? Things are firing at the wrong times and things are dysregulated. The whole system is dysregulated. Okay, so now let's head into some new territory, one that hardly any people talk about, and it's a big deal. Okay, we're going to talk about your kidneys, which is number 7. Most people think of the kidneys as your body's filter, which is true. They're constantly cleaning your blood, removing waste products, and helping maintain fluid balance. But they also play a role in blood sugar regulation. Here's how it works in a healthy body. When your blood sugar levels get too high, your kidneys kind of step in as a backup plan. They can filter out that excess glucose and send it out of the body through your urine. It's kind of a protective mechanism, like your body's saying, all right, too much sugar, let's flush some of this out. But in people with type 2 diabetes, something different happens. Instead of getting rid of that extra glucose, the kidneys actually reabsorb it and send it right back into the bloodstream, which sounds backwards. I mean, reabsorbing it is an important part of the system, okay? But we're talking about too much reabsorption when we don't need to. So you're trying to lower blood sugar and your kidneys are going like, nope, let's hang on to that sugar in case we need it later. It's like a hoarder instinct, but at the worst possible time. Now, you've got basically you have a body that's already struggling to manage glucose and the kidneys are undermining the efforts, right? By recycling this sugar. And this isn't some fringe issue. This mechanism plays a meaningful role in why blood sugars can stay elevated, even when someone's doing everything right. To make things even more complicated, this reabsorption happens through a specific transporter in the kidneys called SGLT2. Okay. That's what certain diabetic medications target, the SGLT2 inhibitors. Okay. They're blocking the transporter, so your body is forced to pee out the excess glucose instead of reabsorbing it. But here's the important part for those of us focused on lifestyle and nutrition. If we don't recognize the role of the kidneys in this process, we might overlook a key piece of why someone's blood sugar might not be coming down, even with a solid low carb plan, for example. It's another reminder that type 2 diabetes is not just about carbs or calories. It's about how every system in the body responds to glucose and insulin. So if you've ever seen a glucose reading that makes no sense, you ate well, you walked, you slept, but your blood sugar is high, it might be time to consider the kidneys. Okay. All right. Oh, that's a lot, right? We've made it to the final piece of this ominous octet. I love the name he gave that, by the way. And honestly, this one is one of the most understood. Okay. So number 8, we're going to talk about the brain. Now, we usually associate insulin resistance with the pancreas, the liver, the muscles, but your brain is actually a major player in all of this as well, especially when it comes to hunger, cravings, satiety, even energy balance. Insulin doesn't just work in the body proper, doesn't just work from the neck down, okay? It has jobs in the brain too. It helps regulate signals related to appetite and metabolism. When everything's working the way that it should, insulin tells your brain, hey, we got enough fuel, you're satisfied, you don't need to keep eating. But when the brain becomes insulin resistant, which often happens alongside what's going on in the rest of the body, that signal gets scrambled. And here's what it can look like in real life. You eat a full meal and then you're hungry again 30 minutes later. You're constantly craving carbs or sweets, even when you should feel full. You feel like your metabolism has slowed down to a crawl. No matter what you try, it just doesn't budge. That's not you being lazy or lacking willpower. That's your brain literally not getting the message that fuel has arrived. Okay. And when your brain doesn't recognize that it's fed, it keeps sending out hunger signals. It pushes your body to keep eating, especially quick fix, high reward foods like sugar and starches. And it starts down regulating metabolism, like, well, if we're not getting the fuel we need, we better start conserving energy. So now you're stuck in this vicious loop. You eat, your body stores the fuel because of high insulin. Your brain doesn't recognize the fuel's there. You stay hungry with low energy. You eat again. And this cycle feeds. No pun intended, maybe a little bit. But it's the very problem we're trying to fix. This is why managing blood sugar alone isn't enough. This is why insulin matters. Because when your brain becomes insulin resistant, it's hijacking your ability to feel full, control cravings, and burn energy efficiently. The good news is it's not permanent. As insulin levels come down through food choices, lifestyle changes, metabolic support, the brain can become more responsive again. Hunger, your cues for hunger can normalize. Cravings can calm down, and your body finally starts trusting that it's safe to use energy that it already has stored. So, if you've ever said, I feel like I'm always hungry, nothing works anymore, perhaps it's the brain chemistry. So, there you have it, the full ominous octet. Here's the big takeaway. This is why treating type 2 diabetes with a single blood sugar lowering drug, for example, doesn't work long term because it might address one of these symptoms, at least temporarily, but seven others are still potentially broken. And until we shift focus from just blood sugar to full body metabolic repair, people are going to stay stuck. Okay? You've heard the full list: the liver, the muscles, the fat cells, the gut, the brain, the pancreas, the kidneys. I know it's a lot. And you might be thinking, okay, Trina, that's all fascinating, but it feels like my whole body is broken. Where do I even start? Well, here's the good news. You don't have to fix 8 things separately because the root issue tying all of this together is insulin. Every single one of those systems is either sensitive to, controlled by, or made worse by chronically elevated insulin. Let's think back to the liver, for example, the one pumping out glucose like it's its full-time job. Why does it do that? Because insulin signaling isn't working. The liver thinks you're starving, so it starts making sugar and pumping it out. Same with the muscles. They won't absorb glucose properly because insulin resistance is blocking the door. The pancreas, it's overworked because insulin needs are higher than normal. The fat cells, they're being told to hold on to fat because insulin says, store, don't burn. Even your brain, when insulin doesn't work there, your hunger signals go haywire. Cravings skyrocket. You feel like you're never full. So if you can lower insulin, and I'm not talking about like with a prescription, I'm talking about with lifestyle strategies like low carb eating, stress reductions, better sleep, targeted movements, then you're not just putting a band-aid on symptoms. You're shifting the whole system. And I know the medical system has not caught up to this yet. I know most doctors aren't measuring insulin. They're not explaining any of this, but the research is there. The pathophysiology is clear. The problem is insulin resistance. The solution is not eat less, move more. The solution is learning how to bring insulin down so your body can function the way it was designed to. And if that feels new or radical, it's not. It's just not being talked about enough. But that's why we're here, right? It's why I do this podcast. So, what does this mean for you? Well, first, take a breath, okay? You don't need to memorize all 8 pieces of this ominous octet or become an endocrinologist overnight, okay? You do, however, deserve to understand what's actually going on in your body. Because when you understand the full picture, everything starts to make more sense. Maybe now it clicks why your blood sugar could still be, quote, in range, but you feel like garbage. Maybe it explains why cutting calories didn't work or why weight loss stalls after a few weeks, or why your doctor keeps adjusting your meds but never talks about insulin or muscle tissue or gut hormones. It's not because you're doing something wrong, it's because the system is focused on the wrong thing. Okay, here's the truth. Blood sugar is the smoke. Insulin resistance is the fire, and the ominous octet is the fuel. Okay? And when you shift your focus to lowering insulin, you're not just chasing a number on a glucose monitor. You're repairing your metabolism, you're getting to the root, you're working with your body instead of trying to hack or punish it into submission. And that's the kind of change that actually lasts. So, if you're ready to stop playing whack-a-mole with symptoms and finally understand what's driving your health from the inside out, you're in the right place. And I'm glad that you're here. This podcast, this community, this approach is built for that. And we'll keep walking it together one layer at a time. So, if this episode has helped connect some dots for you, please share it. Send it to a friend, a parent, a coworker, anyone who's ever said, I don't get why nothing is working. Okay, let's spread the real story because the more we talk about insulin resistance, the more power we give people to take their health back. So, thanks for joining me today. And until next time, take care of yourself, and I will talk to you soon.